And I want you to turn and look at those words together with me now. Chapter 20 and verse 1 says, "Then God spoke all these words, saying," and while it might not be absolutely clear here in Exodus, it's very clear when you read the account of this over in Deuteronomy, when Moses retelling how all of this had taken place, that God actually spoke these words in the hearing of the whole nation. It wasn't just that he spoke in this case to Moses and then Moses relayed to the rest of the people. But these are things that God said to the whole nation. And this is before they've been written down on the tablets of stone. Afterwards, Moses will go up in the mountain and get the tablets of stone with these 10 commandments written on them. But here, for the very first time that these are presented to the children of Israel, God actually speaks these words from heaven for all of them to hear. And he begins by reminding them how he had delivered them out of Egypt. He says, "I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery." And with that, the 10 commandments begin. Number 1, in verse 3, "You shall have no other gods before me." The second commandment, in verse 4, "You shall not make for yourself an idol, or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children, on the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands, to those who love me and keep my commandment." And then in verse 7, the 3rd commandment, "You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain." Then in verse 8, the 4th commandment, "Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days shall you labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle or your sojourner who stays with you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the 7th day, the Sabbath day, and made it holy." And then in verse 12, "Honor your father and mother, that your days may be prolonged in the land which the Lord your God gives you." That's the 5th commandment. The 6th in verse 13, "You shall not murder." Verse 14, "You shall not commit adultery." Verse 15, "You shall not steal." Verse 16, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." And verse 17, the 10th and last of the commandments, "You shall not covet." "You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." These 10, then, are the 10 commandments that, of course, have figured so prominently ever since. Now, I want to present lessons to say tonight on the subject of the 10 commandments, but I think probably whenever we make reference to the 10 commandments, there are 2 or 3 things that probably come first and foremost to many of our minds. One of the things that, say, 10 commandments, we have just certain almost automatic reactions. And one of them is that you can't be saved just by keeping the 10 commandments. Now, the reason we tend to react that way is for, in part, a very good reason. There are many people that will say something like, "Well, I believe if a person just keeps the 10 commandments, he'll be all right." And you have perhaps heard people say that. "I believe if a person just keeps the 10 commandments, he'll be all right." Well, let me suggest, first of all, I suppose that, don't misunderstand what I'm saying here, but you know, I'm not really too worried about whether or not somebody be all right just keeping the 10 commandments. I don't believe there's a person on the face of this earth who keeps fully and perfectly the 10 commandments. I don't believe it. Is there anybody who has never coveted, never uttered a falsehood, never served someone other than God? Anybody really that has perfectly kept the 10 commandments? Anyone who has always, without fail and without exception, honored his father and mother? I think the 10 commandments, far from giving us some assurance, well, here's just 10 little things. We'll just check off these 10 little things right here, and I know I'll be okay. No, these are not just 10 little things. These are 10 of the most serious demands that any God anywhere ever asked of his people. And I would suggest in many ways that they sum up an absolute moral perfection. And so don't be deluded by that. Oh, don't worry, just keep the Ten Commandments, you'll be all right. Most people who say you just keep the Ten Commandments and you'll be all right don't really know what the Ten Commandments are anyway. They might, oh yeah, one of them's not murder, and I haven't murdered anybody, so the others are probably like that, and I'm probably okay. No, look at what all of those really are. Maybe we haven't murdered, but what about some of the others? And then, the other reaction that I think many times those of us in the Lord's church have with regard to the Ten Commandments is, well, we are not under the Ten Commandments anymore. And that too has a very important element of truth. We are under the New Covenant, not the Old Covenant. And the Ten Commandments, as they are given here, are part of the Old Covenant. And when Christ died on the cross, the whole of the Old Covenant was abolished. And so we are no longer under the Ten Commandments. That's true. But on the other hand, many of the things expressed in the Ten Commandments are things that God has always expected of all men. God has never told anybody it's all right to commit murder. God has never told anybody it was all right to lie. Even before the Ten Commandments were given, it was a sin to commit adultery, it was a sin to lie, it was a sin to murder. And the fact that we are no longer under the Old Testament system doesn't mean that we are now released to do the things that God prohibited in the Ten Commandments. As a matter of fact, I remember fairly well-known preacher Robert Turner, from whom really I got the main idea that I'm going to be presenting in the lesson this night. The lesson he presented on the Ten Commandments, he said, every time I bring up the Ten Commandments, everybody says, oh, well, we aren't under the Ten Commandments anymore. And after all, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament, so if we just follow the New Testament, we'll be okay. He said his response to that when somebody said that was just, okay, can you tell me what the 9 are that are named in the New Testament? A lot of times people say, we're not under that. We don't have to worry about that. After all the important ones are repeated in the New Testament. Okay, what are the important ones that are repeated in the New Testament? I'll settle just for that. So the fact of the matter is, in the New Testament, the Ten Commandments are quoted. And you'll find that Paul reminds people of their obligation to certain parts of these Ten Commandments in Romans chapter 13. You will find that James makes reference to these Ten Commandments in James chapter 2. And so, in many ways, the commandments, the basic moral principles, not all of them, but the basic moral principles encompassed in these Ten Commandments are indeed incorporated in the New Testament. But I want to actually take a different approach tonight, one, as I say, that was suggested to me some years ago by Brother Turner. And that's this. Yes, it's true, we don't live under this Old Testament system anymore. But we do live under the same God. And the fundamental nature of God does not change. And one of the great benefits that we derive from studying the Old Testament is it teaches us about God. And that is especially true, I believe, of the laws that God gave to the children of Israel. Now, let me illustrate. The laws of any people reveal something about those people and their values. You know, if somebody looked at the laws of the United States, I think he'd have to come to the conclusion that one of the things that we value as a society is freedom and liberty, because so many of our laws are designed to protect freedoms and liberties that we enjoy. And so, by looking at the laws that we make, you say, okay, these are people for whom liberty and freedom are very important. They're very high on their value scale. And so without knowing us, just by looking at the laws that we make for ourselves, they learn something about us. If I could use another illustration. People learn something, said it this way. How many times does it happen that parents form an opinion about the parents of the playmates of their children on the basis of what those children report about what their parents will and won't let them do? They say, oh, my mom and daddy won't let me do that. And you say, mom and daddy won't let him do that. I know something about his mom and daddy now. Or if he says, oh, my mom and daddy let me do that, you say, I know something about his mom and daddy now too. The point is, the rules that parents make for their children, the laws that parents make for their children, reveal something about those parents. And we come to know and understand them better by seeing the types of rules that they lay down. And we can make a lot of other illustrations of that. Over at Florida College, people form an opinion about the nature of that school on the basis of the rules that we have for our students to live by. And those rules, to some degree, hopefully, express something of the values and beliefs of the people that made them and the students that come and choose to submit to those rules.